Welcome, my friends, to a very special edition of Digital Noise, which is to say, every edition of special Digital Noise is special because we're both special. At least that's what they told us in middle school when our parents put us into those special classes.
We're not special. This is the deluxe edition, okay? We double dip in this house.
Okay, that's fair. That's it. We're the bonus features of bonus feature shows, I guess. I don't know. What are you drinking there, Aaron?
I am drinking Beefeater gin and some slightly sweetened strawberry seltzer water, which is
You've been recommending.
Maybe the most dangerous drink I've ever had because I can't taste the alcohol, and there's a lot there.
Yeah, that's how they get all those sorority girls.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
Well, we're not here to review alcohol drinks, although that show might come at some point in the future.
I'm willing to. I'm down with that, you know?
Yeah, no, me too. I mean, like, especially we do like a roving, like, we're trying out this. Hey, it's free, right, buddy? Because we're reviewing it. It's free, right?
There you go.
Both these these $27 drinks, they're free? Yes, okay. We'll take your most expensive scotch. It's free, right? Sounds like me at South by Southwest.
Hey, they stipulated a 2-drink minimum. They didn't say which drinks.
Exactly. We're here to review Blu-rays and occasionally DVDs, not as often these days, and occasionally 4Ks, more and more often. And Aaron and I have a lot to talk about this week. We're going to get started with a 4K of a film that really flew in under the radar this year for for a year that was filled of studios like holding back their big stuff, their big releases, their big theatrical type movies. It was one of the few that like slipped in that people were like, didn't have on their radar and went, wow, that was much better than I would have expected, and kind of scratched that itch of like, oh, fun summer cool movies, and that is Love and Monsters.
Yeah, this hit release before I even knew it existed.
Yeah,
like I was debating whether or not this was originally supposed to be a theatrical film, if it was a straight to DVD or not, or like really what it was. It doesn't matter because it's legitimately a lot of fun. And so it's basically kind of a low-key YA redo of A Boy and His Dog. I
would have gone with a Zombieland, like, different take. Okay.
No. This is the warm bodies version of A Boy and His Dog. Because like it takes a traditionally post-apocalyptic, gruesome, nasty, depressing topic, kind of gives it a little bit of a romance twist, and somehow it works, even though a twee romance monster movie shouldn't. But basically, the plot, such as it is, it takes place after essentially the destruction of Earth. There was an asteroid headed. We tried to blow it up. Shit went bad, and all the bugs and the lizards,
all animal and bug life on Earth got mutated and huge.
All the nice animals died, and all the scary animals got big. Yeah. And so it fast forwards 7 years later, where the main character Joel Dawson, who's played by Dylan O'Brien. It's nice to see him back working again after his injury. But he gets
and also, can I point out one of the best things about the mixed Maze Runner films, which are generally not as bad as people think they are? Like, they're okay. Sometimes they're really good, but he was the lead guy and he was great in them.
Yes, he was. And I think it was the third Maze Runner where he hurt himself, actually.
Yeah.
But essentially, he gets separated from his girlfriend, and it jumps forward 7 years later into it. And he is the sole single guy in Fuck Palace Central. He's basically in a bunker with like 4 different couples who are just having sex around the clock.
And occasionally dying.
And he is dealing with PTSD from, the monsters that came and ate everyone he ever knew. And also lonely because he realized for the first time in those 7 years his girlfriend is still alive. And so he decides very early on, you know what? I don't care that everyone thinks I'm a coward. I don't care that I'm probably going to die. I am going to take the 7 to 8 day journey on foot from my colony to her colony and tell my girlfriend that I still love her.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the setup of the movie. It's him going on this journey and running into colorful characters, running into cool monsters that have great design work.
Oh, yeah.
And having just a fun adventure with the dog. And of course, like when we get into the third act, I'm not going to go too much into it, but we get some twists and turns. Things aren't as what they seem. And one thing that I will comment on that I would like that this movie did, despite the fact that it sets up a like nice guy fantasy movie, which we've seen 1,000 times before, every time they approach that moment and they give the main character a chance to be kind of a dick about it, instead he takes a breath and is like, no, you're right, I'm wrong, that makes sense.
Yeah.
This is a good movie. This is just a good, fun movie.
Yeah, they set it up to be that whole, like, why don't girls, like, respond good to nice guys? And they end up with, like, something that's a lot more complicated than that and a lot more interesting and a more realistic character, a more likable character with your lead. Like, when you transpose all the monsters and the apocalypse out of it with the idea of, like, she was the one and I'll do anything to chase her down and make sure we're together forever and, like, see what the movie does with that. It's like, oh, well, that was interesting.
Yeah.
But, outside of that, as you said, just tremendous monster design, really funny stuff that goes on all throughout it. And Michael Rooker is like a wandering monster hunter with his little like ward, a young girl. Is just
I was gonna
so
talk
great.
about him.
I'm like, why aren't they in this whole? They should just said, you know what, you're now part of our party. I'm putting you in the left-hand side of our screen here, add you in, and you're gonna be there for the whole rest of the movie.
Yeah, strangely enough, the thing that I took away from this movie that like I giggled at and had the biggest like impact was not both. They have a rule where because it's the post-apocalypse and everything's trying to kill you, you can either get a nap or you can get a hot meal. You don't get both.
Yeah.
It's like that has now woven its way into my fantasy end of the world preparation like path. It's just like, okay, don't forget not both.
Agreed. This movie is adorable. It's clever. It's really pretty. And I desperately wanted more when it was over. And I'm not going, oh, well, this is like a groundbreaking film. I fully acknowledge like this owes a lot to Zombieland. There's no question. To like the basic feel of it, outside of the whole like meta-ness of like freeze the thing and have like meta shit on happening on the screen and above the board narration. It doesn't have that, but I still felt like there's no question. I like it's related to that, but in some ways I felt like I liked it a little bit more than those movies because it just has a sweetness to it, a charm to it that I'm like, more than the Zombieland films, I'd watch this with kids.
See, I lean back towards Warm Bodies because it's that pseudo-romance, kind of twee, humorous, winking at the camera feel that shouldn't work. But because they're earnest about it and they stick the humor, it manages to pull you in and entertain throughout.
And so there's some decent bonus stuff here as well. There's almost 12 minutes of deleted scenes that I watched all of and went, yeah, all of these were worth watching. None of them are essential or huge pieces missing, but they're cute little extra pieces. There's Bottom of the Food Chain, the cast of Love and Monsters for almost 8 minutes, which takes a look at, it's EPK-ish type thing, which looks at the actors. And then It's a Monsters World, creating a post-apocalyptic landscape for about 7 minutes, which looks into the Australian shooting locations where it was shot, the cinematography, the production design, the creation of the monsters, and more. Yeah, I think this is a solid release, both as just a movie to watch and as actually, for bonus features wise, one to own.
Yeah. Hollywood or I wish the studios out there would make more movies like this. I don't want a sequel. I want other stuff like this.
Well, I do actually want a sequel. I want more of this. I want to see more of this world. I like the world they created. I do. Well, let's move into one that, like, Love and Monsters was a big studio release. What wasn't a big studio release was the Korean film Beasts Clawing at Straws. And I remember when this came out, was just sent to me under the table on Blu-ray. I went like, well, what is this? And was this artsploitation?
Yes.
Okay.
I had to comment on that because this is the first time I have watched an artsploitation release, which I actually appreciate unabashedly without reservations.
Okay, so there's a few that I like a lot. There's one or two that I've loved. Like Snowflake is one of the big ones for me where I'm like, oh God, everybody sees Snowflake. It's so good. But this is, one of the like, usually with them, I would say like 6 times out of 10, you're going to get one. You're like, what are you doing?
Artsploitation will forever be the production company that put out my most hated digital noise title of all time.
Red Christmas.
Red Christmas. And no, I'm never gonna until I see something worse. I'm never gonna forget it. It's there.
But it goes a long way towards forgiving them for Beast Kalong. It straws for me because this Korean film, written and directed by Kim Young-hoon as his debut feature film, is a crazy sort of Korean Tarantino-esque type film that defies expectations, leaves you wondering who to trust and who not to trust. A bunch of really fascinating characters in this interwoven, non-linear crime story that, admittedly, at worst, you can't watch this film with your phone on at all. It takes a lot of paying attention to because it's a little bit of a complex storyline in the way it's all constructed, but pays off in such a huge way. Divided into 6 chapters. At the end of this, I was like, God damn, this is going to go into my top list of like best Korean films the last couple of years.
It's also an unabashedly gorgeous movie. It feels like it was shot by the South Korean equivalent of Roger Deakins. Mm-hmm. Like almost every single scene in this movie is lit by the neon glow of the lights outside. And so they keep doing this thing where they frame all the characters and the internal locations with giant windows behind them or around them. And you could always see the lights playing off of them. It's just... It's one of the first times I've seen a South Korean movie really nail that feel of the city is a character that you get sometimes in like American crime films that take place in New York. Like I adored the feel of this. In fact, I'm just going to go out and say this. I really want to see this South Korean filmmaker do other stuff. I don't know why, but I found myself going like, I really want this guy to make, of all things, the Rogue Squadron movie, just because I would love to see the way he shoots space scenes with his cinematographer. I think that would be fun.
But this is a powerful debut.
But this actual movie, it has one of the more apt titles. It basically is a disjointed movie following several disparate storylines as characters who are either unabashedly bad or who like to think that they're good people break bad in order to get a Louis Vuitton bag full of thousands and thousands of dollars. Or I should know the South Korean currency. I don't off the top of my head.
I don't either. Yeah. It follows a character whose Jungman is the primary character from the beginning, who's like got a shitty job working at a sauna. His boss hates him. No one seems to particularly like him there. He has to work there to care for his sick mom, and he finds a huge bag of money left in a sauna. All right. So then it goes, let's go back. And it does sort of trace in and out. Well, where the hell did this bag come from? That follows a customs official who's in debt to a criminal who wants to run a scam on someone who's trying to run out of the country. It follows a escort who has an abusive husband who sees a way out when one of their clients offers to murder them in exchange for a cut of the life insurance policy. And all these things stream in and out, and you find yourself fascinated and, like I said, slightly confused until you're not about how all these things are going to tie together. Because there was a period halfway through, I'm like, I feel like I'm watching 3 totally different movies, and I'm not sure what they have to do with each other. And then you do.
I'm glad you called that out because I had the same issue. When we get towards like the end of the first act, beginning of the second act, there's a period where there's so much going on that it slows down and doesn't hold as much interest. But then one of the storylines kind of reaches its end with a relatively big twist. And from that point on, it's like, no, this is an amazing movie. We're in.
Yeah, I feel like this is a movie that is going to really benefit from rewatching. Agreed. Certainly. Like, not that I didn't enjoy it the first time, because I really did. It just is one of those films that you have to be confident enough that it's going to all pay off and this is worth your time, because there'll be points you're like, I don't even know what's going on, but you will if you're paying attention. And by the end, you're like, God damn, that was kind of brilliant. I look forward to seeing it again with knowing ahead of time what the plot is, how these interplay, and I feel like I'm missing a lot having seen it the first time through without already knowing how they were interconnected.
Agreed, very much so.
There's not a lot extra here, unfortunately. There's just trailers, but I will say this is, it's weird that Artsploitation got a hold of like a Korean film. This hasn't really been the way they've pointed themselves in the past. A lot of other distribution companies have, and this had a really good festival series of releases here. It was postponed because of COVID. I think that was the main thing, but it's at 100% on Rotten Tomatoes because it's really good.
It also has a polish that Artsploitation doesn't usually have. Because they go for more independent movies, their movies always have a little bit more of a homemade quality to it. Like I hope this is indicative of a new direction they're moving. I want to see more titles like this in their collection.
Yeah, I 100% agree. But we're going to move on to our next title, which is a documentary called White Riot. Now, before you go, oh God, is this a political film? Okay, it is, but that's not it's a music film, right? There's a bunch of stuff I don't really completely know or didn't know about the British punk music scene. Like there's a lot of details of like, well, you had to be there type stuff. And what White Riot does is goes into the idea of the fact that there was a lot of racism happening in England publicly. People like, which I didn't even know before I saw this, Eric Clapton coming out and being like saying things like stop Britain from becoming a black colony that he said live on stage, keep Britain white. I mean, oh my God. And this politician called Enoch Powell, who was just like, you know, the Mitch McConnell of England or what have you, like a very anti-immigration, really, really racist guy who led to some ways there was a aftershock of the punk scene, having a political party called the National Front that ended up with the skinheads, the sort of the birth of the racist skinheads. By the way, Rod Stewart, also a piece of shit, or racist piece of shit. Didn't know that before I saw this.
One thing is, this movie's kind of a music documentary, but not really. It's kind of a documentary about British racism, but not really.
Yeah.
Like ultimately what it is it's about a zine, a magazine that was put out in the British zine. Thank you.
Zine.
Sorry, I'm uncool.
It's all right. I know. I love you for your uncoolness.
But it was put out focusing on the British punk culture with an explicit point and goal of fighting against the National Front Party. And so like it touches punk music, it touches racism, it touches British politics, but really it's about this zine that was created, that targeted this political movement, reprinted news stories and put out really hard-hitting investigative pieces on who was racist and who was not, and how this political movement was moving across Britain, and paired up with the equivalent of the, and I'm probably getting this wrong, but what seemed like the British Black Panther movement, a bunch of African British people who were trying to like, no, we are fighting the political side of things, and so that they could target the more political activist side, while the zine could actually go in and focus on the music and the culture as well. And so like it's about that zine's journey, but because it touches on so much, you get a lot of everything. I was actually pinging you randomly while watching this documentary going like, wait. So is this what punk culture was like? I had no idea.
Well, it was what part of it was like, certainly. This leads up to a 1978 concert, as you said, the big Rock Against Racism concert, which was held in a part of England that was not considered to be like progressive, certainly. And that was very much on purpose, with getting a bunch of big bands, including The Clash, who were like their biggest band, right? And the question about like The Clash have one of their most famous songs because White Riot, that their problem with like, okay, you guys, is anyone listening to our lyrics? Because this is not a National Front song. This is an anti-racism song, you know, as still happens even today. I mean, certainly in 1978, similar things were happening in the punk movement in America and other countries that were anti-racist as well, raging against the sort of thing that unintentionally got inspired by Sid Vicious and Susie Sue from Susie and the Banshees wearing swastika bands that were literally there for outrage, but they hadn't. It was just naivete that they had no idea that some people would take them that seriously. And it's a fascinating look into this very complex period of time in music, and a very motivated group of people who were like, fuck this, who won. Who straight up won, who came in with the power of the youth and the power of like, just people were like, no, absolutely not. No Nazis in the ice cream, who came in and were like, no, we absolutely will not accept this. And really just made a huge difference.
Yeah. And honestly, it's a great documentary. Out of the two that we have, I think it was the one that I drifted to more. And even not really being a particular fan of the punk genre, I was able to get a lot out of it. Granted, we're going through a lot of the similar things right now today in America, so it was a little relevant for me. You know, like I think I watched this within a day of the insurrection attempt on the Capitol, and it was like, okay, I get this.
You're like, oh, that's how it got started. I see. Well, we're going to move on to our next film, which is the Criterion release of Amores Perros. I'm not saying that with the proper enunciation, I'm well aware, but that has never been my strong point, as anyone who's been watching the show for a long time knows, and I apologize for that. By Alejandro González Iñárritu, who is a Spanish director who went on from this film his big, debut, literally debut in 2000, to doing other films that were really widely loved. 21 Grams, Babel, Beautiful, Birdman, The Revenant. I mean, he's no question, whether or not you like those films, an important and interesting director. And Amores Perros is one of those films that I saw when it first came out, and I remember really liking it, but it was one of those films that kind of left me. I was like, I can't remember if I even saw it or not when I got this Criterion edition of it. Did I see this? But it's noted as the first installment of his trilogy of death, which was 21 Grams and Babel, which are the three films that do this, which is sort of a multiple narratives that all come together in a way that, like, in 2000 was definitely reminiscent of Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. People were comparing it to it actively there. The title is, funny enough, a Spanish pun. Perros literally means dogs, but it also can be used to refer to misery. So it roughly means bad love, but it also could be translated as saying having dog connotations. And there is a lot of dog stuff going on in this movie.
Yeah, fair warning before going into this movie. If you have any kind of issues watching animals get hurt on film, the animals themselves were not hurt. They were not. The filmmakers promise you. But nevertheless, there's a lot of dog death in this movie.
Yeah, and it looks real. But, I mean, they knew starting this film that this was going to be examined, so there's lots of footage they shot outside of the actual filmmaking to be clear. No one was hurt. We had people on board here, ASPCA people watching this. No dogs were hurt, but it's startling to watch because it feels like they were. But I did do the challenge where if you frame by frame it and pause it, there's lots of dogfighting scenes, and you can see that they've got clear plastic muzzles on. It's just shot in a way you can't tell if you're watching it, at the speed it is intended to be seen.
I'll be honest. I get what you're talking about with this movie leaving you. And the director, he's one of those people that I've respected. But out of all of his movies, the only one I've seen that really ever hit me was Birdman. I love Birdman.
Birdman's great.
While I haven't seen Revenant, the rest of them were okay. They were okay. I get what you're going for. It's not necessarily my cup of tea. And I think that's the problem I ran into with this one. It might just be that it's been 21 years, roughly, or almost 21 years since this movie came out. And so we've seen lots of other titles do this kind of thing. And I ended up never really getting into the rhythm or feeling like everything tied together in a way that I wanted it to. And a lot of the stories, while I was like, okay, those are heartbreaking and emotional stories, they're well acted, I also never really ended up connecting with many of the characters.
Well, part of that might just be that. Well, what is our point of connection to these characters? I mean, this is a very Spanish film. There's nobody in here that I really am like, oh, I've been through that. Like, no, I don't have that connection. But I will say on rewatching it, I admired it deeply. The way it's constructed, the way the stories interact with each other and come together, which is like Gael Garcia Bernal, this is one of his first movies.
Yeah, and it had to have been around when he was doing Y Tu Mama Tambien too. He looks the exact same.
He's in love with his brother's wife, played by Vanessa Baruch. His brother is a real piece of shit. And he's trying to say, why don't you come away with me? I love you. He's got a dog, and he is like, oh, well, maybe I'll get the money to get this new life with this dog who's actually kind of a badass to like win at these fights. And then you've got a magazine publisher, Daniel, played by Alvaro Guerrero, who has left his family to live with his lover, Goya Toledo, who's a Spanish supermodel. The day they are moving in together, her leg is really badly broken in a car accident. She can't keep being a model. Her dog disappears through a broken floorboard in their new apartment, which gets into a weird sort of like, is this going to get into a horror thing? But that story just gets weirder and more disturbing. And that's the one I'm like, this has nothing to do with anything else in this story. Like, you could have cut this out of this film entirely. Although I think it's a good story. It has nothing really to do with anything else.
But it also, like, the girlfriend who he leaves his family for is strangely the character I ended up most connected to. Like, the two wives, or the girlfriend and the wife in this movie, or the two, I was like, okay, I'm with you guys and I'm interested in your journeys.
Yeah. And then Emilio Echevarria, who is, you'll know from Y Tu Mama Tambien, amongst many other films. He was in Die Another Day and The Alamo and multiple other things. He's the guy, I think, when I first saw this, I recognized the most. He plays a vagrant who turns out to be a professional vagrant hitman.
Because of course you are.
Because of course he is. And that story kind of ties the more into the first story. But, I did overall think that this was really, really enjoyable to watch. It's a little long.
Yeah. You could lose half an hour in this movie without too much of an issue, I think.
It's 153 minutes. That's a long time for any movie that's not just startling in every frame. And there are people who argue this film is startling in every frame. But I still think this is a movie that you're like, yeah, you're going to want to see it.
So it's long. It's shot handheld, which it makes it very visceral. The color balance is very cold, and a lot of the color's been drained from it. So it has a very particular aesthetic. But like, if this is your jam, if you really dig Mexican cinema, or you have that cultural context so you can feel that connection to the stories, this is a classic. It's a powerful film. I would definitely recommend it for anyone who is into those kinds of movies.
Well, the Criterion edition comes with an illustrated booklet with essays by critic Fernanda Solizano and author Juan Villero, as well as technical credits. There's a vintage trailer. There's a extra feature, a new program made for this with Inarito and Pawlikowski, who did one of my favorite foreign language films of the past several years, Cold War, who discussed the making of this film, which I thought was fascinating to watch. There's a new program, Reunion, which gets together several of the actors and the director to get back and recall their work on here. There is Pro Logo, which has footage from the rehearsals here. Peros Ameros Accidentes, which is a new program, which is research and raw footage from the production of this. Gustavo Santaolalla, and new video interview with the composer of the music here. There's 3 music videos, 2 of them directed by Inarritu himself. There's a new video essay written and directed and narrated by critic Paul Julian Smith in English. There's 3 deleted scenes. Overall, this is a solid Criterion release of a film that if you missed along the way, I don't want to undersell it. This is way worth your time to check out. But yes, you're right, Aaron. The dogfighting scenes are upsetting. And if that's something that you're sensitive to at all, dogs getting hurt, you're not going to want to watch this movie.
So there are 3 stories. All 3 stories, have dog death and violence as a major component and theme of the story.
Yeah.
So brace yourselves.
Well, Blue Underground continues their tradition of putting out 4K releases of older, cult, obscure to some, but not obscure to others, of releases. And now they're going on from horror, which is largely what we've covered from them before, to action, vigilante films with the film Vigilante, a 1982 film. If you saw it on video in the 80s, it might have been called Street Gang, but it was directed by the William Lustig, who I always say is, to me, best known as being the guy who did Maniac and Maniac Cop and Maniac Cop 2. But
any director whose name has the word lust in it who makes exploitation cinema is worth watching.
But this stars Robert Forster and Fred Williamson. It's a beautiful transfer. It just looks gorgeous. And if you like the sort of like the people from the street rise up because they're sick of the corrupt police and they're sick of like the system working against them and they're going to get revenge the only way they have available to them. I mean, this is one of those movies.
Yeah. I was impressed with the fact that it manages to both be a ultra right-wing conservative fantasy about like cleansing the streets of the gangs and killing everyone, as well as a liberal fantasy about the minorities rising up and like fighting for justice on their own. Like it manages to somehow be propaganda for both groups at the same time. And like honestly, like there was a lot that I liked about this movie. I dig this kind of weird 80s and 70s obscure cinema. I think that this one was mostly really enjoyable. I ended up having an issue with the structure of it, though, because it feels like they had two different movies and they weren't quite sure which one they wanted to make, and so they made both. And so there's one movie with Robert Forster basically being the Punisher, where his family is killed by random gangs for no good reason. And then he goes to jail and spends a third of the movie off camera in jail, where the movie then switches to Fred Williamson doing his vigilante game, fighting back for the streets of justice. And then after it sticks with that for like a good 30 minutes, it then switches back to Robert Forster and his rampage of revenge.
Yeah, it's there's something disturbing about a 70s film that's like, or 80s film that's like, hey, you know, we're fighting back, but oh, thank God a white guy is here to lead us now.
But both stories are legitimately good, but together, like that shift between the two, I didn't get it. I really wish they had found a way to have Robert Forster involved throughout, and so his story actually felt like the main story. Or just they picked one, but you know what? This is like a kind of fun, kind of shitty, kind of great 80s exploitation cinema. It's not going to be an Academy Award winner. Like it's going to have issues.
No, of course it's not going to be. Yeah, no, it's a little revenge exploitation film. If you like these type of films, I think this is one I'm so glad I saw this. I actually, this was off my radar entirely. I'm sure I read about it in the past, but just never really followed up on it. But I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I got a chance to see this and a really good copy of it. I mean, I love Fred Williamson and Robert Forster both. And I found this actually, you know, despite a certain amount of inescapable inappropriateness from a film in this time that was trying to be like down to the streets and what have you, you know, certain amount of misogyny and racism that's going to come inherent in those things. It's very, very entertaining and well shot. I loved seeing Woody Strode, famous, one of the first Black American players in the National Football League post-war, who's a big legend in there, and then went on to actually get a Golden Globe Award for nominated for a Golden Globe Award for Best Supporting Actor for being in Spartacus in 1960. But he's one of those actors who was just in a bunch of stuff over the years and sort of a smaller character a lot of the time. And it was so nice to see him as sort of the guy in jail who takes Robert Forster under his arms, like, hey, it's all right, man. I won't let you get raped.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to call that out. If you want to know what kind of movie this is, when the plot describes that character, he's like, Eddie befriends an inmate named Rake, played by Woody Strode, who saves him from being gang raped.
It's true. It is accurate. I do think if you know who you are, if you like this type of movie, this might be one that you're like, escaped your notice, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. And it's a great transfer from Blue Underground, who's been doing a tremendous job lately, sort of leading the pack. You know, they were one of those, they started suddenly putting out a bunch of 4K releases of like these smaller films, but cult films. Hey. And I noticed other companies like Arrow and Shout Factory going, wait, what? Are we doing that now? And rushing, oh shit, we got to do that now.
I've always respected Blue Underground. They're the ones who turned me on to Dario Argento. They release good transfers of good stuff.
Yeah. There's a bonus features is Blue Collar Death Wish, a new program with Bill Lustig, writer Richard Vitair, producer Randy Jorgensen, and more, who discuss the production of it. The problems with like looking back on it based on the error it received and the reception it had, and lots of funny stories for 25 minutes. There's Urban Western, a new video program with the composer Jay Chataway. There's 3 different commentary tracks on here. Lots of trailers, TV spots, promotional reels, galleries, and then there's even more bonus stuff hidden away in the, you know, shoved into it. There's a reversible cover with vintage postage art and poster art, and then a 20-page illustrated booklet featuring an essay doing justice to vigilante and technical credits. So this is a solid fucking release for people who this is their thing.
It is disturbing to the degree that I love when these archival re-releases of old Grindhouse movies put the reversible poster from like the original VHS release in it. It always makes me happy. That's always the cover I pick.
So we're going to move into a documentary now of the great Audrey Hepburn, just called Audrey, More Than an Icon. Now, anybody that knows me, has listened to me for enough years, knows, I love Audrey Hepburn. I thought she was tremendous. She was a person who, like, after just literally kind of getting bored with acting and moving out of it, like going, okay, I've had enough. Like, I'll show up every once in a while, but was so wealthy from doing it and already had other connections that she went on and became this huge person for charity. She was just a good person, right? A good human being. Unfortunately, that doesn't always lead to the most interesting of documentaries. I'm like, oh, well, let's see. You skip over in about 10 minutes of this documentary, the portion of her life where she was literally fighting undercover the Nazis and just move on to her film career. I'm like, can we get back to the fighting the Nazis part?
Well, the thing is this really doesn't feel like a true Blue documentary. It is and Chris taught me this word.
I was wondering if you were going to do this.
Fuck yeah, I am. It's a hagiography. Basically, it's not a biography. It's a canonization of a saint. And that's the way this is played up. It's not learn anything new about Audrey Hepburn you haven't heard before. It's check out Audrey Hepburn. Wasn't she an angel for an hour and 20 minutes? Yeah. Like there's a lot of cool stuff. So I don't have the connection with Audrey Hepburn. As much as I know the movies she's been in, I've never actually seen one of her films. Including Breakfast at Tiffany's. Don't hate me. I'm sorry.
There's a bunch of stuff we're seeing with her.
I know. Not on purpose. It just hasn't happened. But
Roman Holiday, Sabrina.
I lied. I've seen Sabrina.
What's the musical? One. What's the big musical? My Fair Lady. Come on.
But so if you're interested in learning really about who she was beyond the film, her past fighting Nazis or her Nazi father, like that's touched on, but like Chris said, it's not really part of the movie. But if you think that Audrey Hepburn is just the keenest lady who ever existed, and just hearing her story makes your heart feel warm and fuzzy, then you want to check this out.
Yeah.
But if you don't feel warm and fuzzy at the mention of her name,
yeah, I mean, there are better sources to get a sort of literally just any review of Audrey. Wikipedia is like, oh, well, these are the Audrey Hepburn movies I need to see. This is kind of like if you're someone who's just like, no, I love Audrey Hepburn. I just want that mantelpiece. Wasn't she a saint? Hagiography. I don't even know if we're saying that right, but that's phonetically how it is.
Someone will tell us.
Yeah. But yeah, that's what this is. It's fine, but there's nothing really interesting here. Like like I said, the most interesting part of her life. And it might be for lack of information because she was a very private person, but they kind of just get past rather quickly and get into the part of her life was just like, and then she was in a bunch of movies and people were like, wow, she's great. And people were like, wow, she's iconic. And wow, she's beautiful. And then she's like, wow, I think I'd rather do something else.
Yeah. And then she fed people. And there's just like, yeah.
Yeah. It was a thing.
Which
she was.
I am not belittling the accomplishment she did. That's just kind of the way the documentary plays it.
No, she's just one of those people you're like, oh yeah, she was great. And unfortunately, she didn't have the world's most interesting story for lack of information. I don't know what to tell you. She did not. Someone on our site was recommending we do a review of a Pat Morita biography film that was coming out. I'm like, I feel like this is going to be the same thing. Like, what is there? Pat Morita, he was in The Karate. You loved him in The Karate Kid. I don't know. Maybe I missed something and he had like this super fascinating background, but I feel like there would have been a documentary by now if that had been the case.
I don't know. I found that a lot of the times when you have single focus, one person documentaries, that they tend to drift a little more towards this direction.
Yeah.
So I tend to assume they're all like that.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I wasn't expecting a tell-all, like, ooh, here's the juicy bits type of thing. I wasn't wanting that even. But, like, this just isn't terribly interesting. Yeah. Let's move on to our next film. It was a narrative film called Honest Thief. We reviewed this on the site. We weren't on the review for this, which is why we're doing it here. This is a 2020 action thriller film with Liam Neeson. And right there, you know most of what you need to know.
Yeah. All right. So I find the actual story to this kind of an interesting one.
Uh-huh.
Like out of the generic Liam Neeson action pieces, this is the one that I think is the most unique. And so he plays Tom Dolan, who is a master thief. His nickname is the In-N-Out Bandit, which
I'd be like, can you pick another name, please? That's really talk about there's porn of everything.
I think he actually even says that, like, I don't like this name.
Yeah, I'd be like, can I go by like the American Lupin or?
So he robs a lot of banks. He has a notoriety over years too, and then he runs into Annie Wilkes. Oop, I hit my mic. He runs into a woman who he falls desperately in love with her. He has a change of personality, a change of priorities, buys a house, is going to ask her to marry him, and decides, you know what? Look, at some point, I'm going to have to tell her that I'm a thief. Like,
also, I'm sorry, can I interrupt you? You said Annie Wilkes. Isn't that the main character from Misery?
Yes, it's Annie Wilkins. It's Annie Wilkins.
I just want to be clear, because that would be a very different film.
And it is. She's played by Kate Walsh, who does a pretty good job.
Yeah.
But so he decides, you know what? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call the FBI. I'm going to turn myself in. I'm going to give him all the money back because of reasons that I'm not going to get into. He kept it all. And then I'm probably going to do some jail time and then be married to Annie. It'll be fun. Unfortunately, due to law enforcement incompetence and not really giving a shit, and then when the law enforcement actually does care, sending is Jai Courtney,
living block of wood. He is
Jai
the dryad of actors
who has been good in one movie I've ever seen.
Yeah, it was what was it? The DC film.
Yeah, Suicide Squad. Which was not a good movie.
No.
He was great in a bad movie.
Great in a bad movie. Yes. And then his partner, Anthony Ramos, who's like, I don't know if I want to go along with this.
Yep. And so,
who was from Hamilton, who deserves better than this bullshit.
So the two of them decide, screw it. We're going to kill Liam Neeson. We're going to take the money, and we're going to say that it was all fake. Liam Neeson, of course, is kind of a badass, and so they get into a fight. People die. He goes on the run, and it kind of becomes a light PG-13 revenge film where he's striking back at the FBI agents, trying to clear his name. And, look, this is... I'm going to damn this movie with faint praise and tell you why this is exactly the kind of movie that I'm happy exists. So it's okay. There's not a lot that's special in this movie. The acting is okay. The story is okay. It's a low to mid budget movie. It's a Liam Neeson actioner. It's one of the better ones for benefit of the fact that it is a unique story, but it's still kind of a generic low budget action movie.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of these, and I've seen all of them. The Liam Neeson, like, mid to low budget action, direct to red box actioners. I mean, it's no Taken, no question. But like, it's fine, like some of these you watch and you're like, Jesus Christ, this is fucking incompetent. There's so much badness. And here I'm like, it does what it needs to do. There's nothing really great here. There's nothing really terrible here. I mean, Jai Courtney's ridiculous as the corrupt cop. Just fucking ridiculous. Like, he's trying to play it over the top and you're like, this doesn't fit really. Like, a cop who had like fell sideways into corruption would have been so much more interesting here, and there was plenty of room for that. And he's like a guy like, fuck it, I don't care. And then Jeffrey Donovan, who is like really, of course, well loved from Burn Notice, is playing like the good cop who has nothing really to do.
No, he doesn't really do anything until the last act, and even then, he's just there to be kind of somebody going through a divorce.
Yeah.
So here's what I like about this movie, though. I think this is the kind of movie that the shift to a streaming priority entertainment industry is going to actually be great for. Because I really miss the mid-grade action film that used to come out straight to DVD or would come out in theaters, make just enough money to make a profit, and just kind of like be fine with it. Yeah. And since the shift to blockbuster cinema, where we're dealing with like, 150, 200 million and up budgets, we've lost this. And
well, it's coming back.
I'm really happy. Like they've been like 2 or 3 that have come out on Netflix in the last 3 months alone. So I'm really excited to start seeing this genre hit again, because this movie, it's okay. But like, I would definitely recommend it for anyone who you have an hour and a half to kill and it's on. Why not? Yeah, you're not going to have a bad time. I wouldn't necessarily buy it. But,
no, it's not a run to it film.
No, it's a throw it on Sunday.
If you like these type of films, this is not a terrible one, and it's fine. It's fine. But I know faint praise damning it, but like it is. It's fine. I watched it and I was like, I don't feel like I wasted my time watching it. I had a good enough time, but
there's a cool
I'll
car
forget.
Chase.
Like 5 years from now, I'll be like, did I see that?
Yeah. But you know what? I don't care. I'm so fucking happy this movie exists. I want there to be more movies like this. Let's make a lot of low to mid-budget action movies, people. Come on.
What I like about this isn't that door's open again in and of itself. What I like is, because of all these streaming services, like, oh, people want to see this sort of stuff. It opens the ground for people going, well, fuck, we can actually experiment a little more with the format here. We can do stuff with this format with actors like Liam Neeson, known for this sort of thing, and do some stuff that takes you off guard and tries new things, which admittedly is happening more in foreign countries than it is happening here right now. But I'm hoping that we Netflix goes, oh, look at the numbers on these foreign language things that we've been putting out lately. They've been doing really well. Maybe we should take a lesson from what they're doing and ask Liam Neeson to maybe throw an interesting twist in. I don't know. Because there's nothing in this movie that you don't know is going to happen in the first half hour. Agreed. You're like, oh, I know everything that's going to happen in this film.
Yeah, there was one character death that kind of surprised me. But that was about it.
Well, let's go on to our DC Animated Universe release, Batman Soul of the Dragon, now out on Blu-ray and 4K, or 4K and Blu-ray, if that is your thing. This, of course, many DC Universe animated original films already. It's the 40th, in fact. Once again, directed by Sam Liu, who's like really been taking charge of this entire department pretty much right now.
He owns it right now.
Yeah, I mean, he did a lot for Marvel as well, weirdly. But this is a Elseworlds. It takes place in the 70s. I'm not in DC's universe. I never at all followed their sort of martial arts universe. Like, I was much more into Shang-Chi from Marvel and that whole world. Here, their Bruce Lee analog was Richard Dragon. And that is the character here created by Dennis O'Neil and James R. Barry, voiced here by Mark Dacascos, actual real martial artist. And it's the story of Well, I mean, in the 70s, the idea like how these people are training in the secret monastery in the Himalayas with O Sensei, who is like in DC, the master of masters of martial arts, any martial arts type shit. It also introduces in here a very Elseworlds version of several characters like Lady Shiva, Jade, Rip Jagger, and Bronze Tiger. None of them even faintly resemble their characters in the comic books, except maybe Lady Shiva, but even then only the tiniest bit. And Batman, who's in here and could literally be anyone.
And now that sounds like a complaint, but that might be my favorite part of this movie.
Yeah, I agree.
This movie is straight up my alley. I dig weird 70s martial arts movies. And the movie itself, even though it has Batman in the title, like Chris said, he's in maybe 5 minutes. No, he's not in 5 minutes. He's only in the costume for like 5 to 10 minutes of the movie.
Yeah.
It's really Bruce Wayne. And really the main character is Richard Dragon. And so while, yes, it does have a parallel story to Batman training into martial arts and learning how he became a badass, really it's about Dragon and Bruce Wayne investigating some theft of some of these priceless items from their past that are used to unlock a door to a parallel dimension with snake gods. Yeah. And the vast majority of this movie is a Enter the Dragon-esque Bruce Lee movie. Like, he wears the same fucking costume and everything, with Bruce Wayne as the sidekick. And that's exactly kind of what I want out of my Batman now. Like, I like that it's a weird genre and it sticks to it. And I like that Batman is a presence, but he's not just some almighty God character who comes in and does everything.
Yeah, he does not save the day at all. Ever.
Like, for the most part, I'm a little tired of the animation style, but otherwise it looked good.
That's one of my big complaints here, is that the animation style here is just so plain. They really looked like rushed as shit. I mean, it's not choppy or anything, but it has like a television animation look to it where all the faces are entirely undetailed. It's just like, oh, this looks not great. My second big complaint is, although it starts strong with the 70s, wakada, 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 it, outside of the soundtrack, which is great, it kind of just forgets about that at one point and goes like, okay, I was like, for an animated film like this, I would have liked to see non-stop 70s shit coming into it. I would have enjoyed it more if they had done that. At one point, outside of sideburns and bell bottoms, you could have not realized it was in the 70s by like 20 minutes into it. And thirdly, like, in retrospect, I'm like, I would watch more of these if Batman is literally a sideline supportive character who's just there sort of witnessing other badasses. But at the time watching it, I was just annoyed he was there at all. I'm like, you have no purpose in this story.
So my complaints, I agree with the animation style. All of the DC animated movies now have this style as their de facto look, and it makes them feel all samey, especially with the period nature of this. This should have been told in a more stylized nature. I have some quibbles with the bat suit itself. That's a me thing. You were making
that's one we disagreed on. Though.
Yeah, this is the tall, long, curved ears, spandex, Bob Kane-esque original Batman design.
But they've never animated him this way before, which is why I liked it.
Yeah, he looked this way in New Frontier. Fair. I'm not a big fan of this design. And also, I'm just going to say it, I hate the very ending of this movie. Like, it's a ha kind of gimme, but I don't think it works as the end of a story. It would have been fine if they had a follow-up, but as it was, I was like, oh, come on.
I agree with you, but I think they were directly nodding to the end of the original Mortal Kombat film here, where they go, ha! And like credits, it's the big boss they have yet to face, or the ending of Angel. But I get to fight the dragon. I was like, it was one of those type endings. I was like, okay, I get what you're getting at. It didn't really fit in this piece, but like it made me laugh that was clearly what you were going for here. Was the I would say more certainly the Mortal Kombat reference. But overall, I mean, this is fine. I want to see more stuff like this, certainly, but I wish they would put a little more work into the detail.
I'm glad that they're starting to shift towards more Elseworld stuff. This is not as good as Man of Steel. Like, I loved Man of Steel. That one hit it out of the park. But if you enjoy martial arts movies or those 70s crime films and you enjoy Batman, it's worth a watch. Just to emphasize, Batman is not the main character in this.
Well, and one of the things I did really like about this is clearly the fights are different because they have to be. This is not just, Batman style fighting. This is supposed to represent martial arts of different styles, because these guys, even though they're all training under the same master, so it makes no sense they have different styles, whatever, but they all have different styles. And they reflect that, and it wasn't apparently incredibly difficult and difficult. Apparently, like, you watch the bonus features here, director Sam Liu was like, when he was approached, said we're going to do this, he was like, oh fuck, you don't even know what you're asking. Like we're basically going to have to take everything we've done before, all the stuff we've developed with like the fighting style of this, and scrap it and try and create something that actually reflects what martial arts would really look like, or people are going to scream at us. And I think overall they did a pretty good job of representing that. Like I said, they go into, it was a lot of work making that come out, and you can tell watching it, like, oh, they actually tried to do something different with the fights and make it feel like real martial arts.
Well, and they animate it differently. They do some interesting things with motion blur. I made it past like the first fight, and then I really started paying attention to the way they handle the movement whenever they did super martial arts speed. It's cool. It's worth watching for that part.
So for bonus features, there's Batman Raw Groove for 30 minutes, which is a look at the 70s, basically. Like, look at all the movies that we were into, wakada, 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 like all that stuff. And it's entertaining enough. On some point, you're like, why didn't you include more of that stuff that you were influenced by? But okay. There's producer Jim Krieg's Far Out Highlights for 18 minutes, which is pretty much the same thing, from producer man Jim Krieg, who I'm just now starting to realize is somebody who will appear on anything from the DC Universe films as long as he gets to wear a costume and play a wacky character. And then a sneak peek from Justice Society World War II, which is going to be the next one, which again, Jim Krieg appears to play a wacky character. And then stuff we've seen before, trailers from Superman Red Sun, Batman Gotham by Gaslight, and then stuff from the DC Vault, 2 vintage episodes of Batman the Animated Series, and then trailers for a lot of their stuff. I mean, this is fine. I'm glad it came out. I wish it had been better than it is, but I still enjoyed it.
Oh, wouldn't it be cool if they had like an Afro Samurai-esque animation style in this movie, or something like really weird or out there?
Dude, the fact that they went to, I am blanking on the name of the animator now, for the Batman Ninja or whatever it was. You remember that one?
I do, but I don't know where you're going.
Blanking on the top. But, it was an entirely different style of animation that was super detailed and like, oh, this fits. And that they didn't go to somebody, like the Afro Samurai guy, or Genndy Tartakovsky would have been a good choice, right? Maybe he did Afro Samurai. I don't even know. But I'm not as great with the animation as I'd like you all to believe. But like, this just looks like another one of the animated universe films. And I'm like, this is a thing that really really would have been helped immensely by having its own distinctive style, for sure.
I agree completely.
Well, let's move into our last film, which I think is a considerably better, kind of must-see animated film, and that's Lupin the Third, the First, which is a little bit of a confusing title, admittedly. Now, Lupin. So we're clear. Right now, Lupin is having a moment. Lupin was originally Arsène Lupin, who was a French detective who literally battled Sherlock Holmes multiple times in the huge amount of novels and novellas and short stories that were published in France around the turn of the century. Last century, not this last turn of the century. And it was a huge, huge deal. He was like a master thief who couldn't be beat, who was super intelligent, but also charming and always did the right thing and fought for good. And the Japanese saw this and went, we love this. We're going to make a character who's his grandson, only he's grown up in Japan. And he became Lupin the Third, of which Castle of Cagliostro became one of Miyazaki's big, Hayao Miyazaki's big shots across the bow as an animator in Studio Ghibli. Like, whoa, what was that in the 80s? And went on to, there's an enormous amount of like Japanese Lupin stuff. There's an enormous amount of French Lupin stuff, but we saw here in America more of the Japanese stuff. So there's a show on Netflix right now called Lupin, which is about a guy who's very Lupin-like, but he's just influenced by Lupin, played by the great Omar Sy.
They also have the Japanese Lupin the Third TV show on Amazon.
Yeah, there's a lot of the Japanese stuff. So this is the Japanese character. Lupin the Third, right? And it's going with a sort of, I guess it's a reboot, right?
Well, with it calling the first, I kind of assumed this was the first, this was the prequel. This is the origin story of sorts, because I haven't seen anything from this character. Like, I know that there was the Miyazaki movie, The Castle of Cagliostro,
which you have to watch. You have to watch.
I know. I want to. Well, I have to now, which I'll get to. So like, I've never actually seen this. This was my first experience, and I thought the character was really interesting. Although I admit I can't stand some of the choices they made for the dubbing in this, which I ended up having to watch this with my son because he saw it once without me when it was just sitting in the stack. I don't know that I would have let my 4.5-year-old watch this, knowing that there's like people getting executed in it all over the place and Nazis and Hitler. But my son adores this with a passion. It has a really beautiful animation style. If you're a geek for that, you're going to love it. But it's also gorgeous. Is so fast paced and so quickly shot, and it just comes at you so much that it was almost too much for me. Like, I found myself having to be like, all right, I need to like walk away from a moment and get a drink of water because I'm overwhelmed with how much is happening and how quick.
It's also 3D CG, which is the first Lupin film that's been made that way. The plot takes place during World War II in France, where there's this book called the Bresson Diary, which has this, clockwork super trap lock that's explosive that the Nazis are trying to get after, that's supposed to lead to this huge treasure, ? Yeah. And then Lupin, there's 10 years we see that initial thing, and 10 years after Hitler dies, now the diary is being shown at a memorial at a big museum. Lupin tries to steal it because his grandfather had a connection to it. And meanwhile, a bunch of other stuff comes up that sort of all leads into the sort of origin story for this character, leads into the other side characters that end up becoming an inextricable part of the Lupin story. If you watch any other of the Japanese Lupin stuff, these characters and their adventures in a very, more than anything, Indiana Jones.
Yeah, it feels like Indiana Jones by way of the Saint.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Totally. And I think it's a lot of fun. It's beautiful looking. It's fast moving. I watched this initially on a screener, which I had no choice to put in the Japanese version. It was dubbed only. I didn't have really a problem with it overall. Overall, I don't have a problem with dubbed animated films. Well, that doesn't bother me as much as long as they get good people to do it. You know what I mean? As long as it's not, because we get an awful lot sometimes of dubbed stuff where it's people were like, and then I did the thing, haha. And I didn't think this was badly done.
I will admit that my issue with the dub is less with the quality of the dub and more that the voice actor, who does a good job, I'm not bashing the actual actor, but the voice that they ended up using, the tone and pitch for Lupin, just was nails on a chalkboard for me. And so, every time the main character was speaking, I had the little twitch in my eye going okay. But, as far as Indiana Jones-esque stories, it's good to be able to introduce my kid to this kind of thing. And while, yes, my son is too young to have watched a movie about Nazis killing people and watching an Indiana Jones story with thieves, it's still something that if your kid is young enough to actually, let me back that up. If your kid is old enough to be able to handle watching something that does have some death and peril in it, this is a great way to introduce your kid to action adventure stories.
I mean, it's no more death and peril than Raiders of the Lost Ark is, though.
I would say Raiders of the Lost Ark is more death and peril than this.
Yeah, maybe more than this. I mean, people die during this, but it's in passing.
Yeah. If you, this is basically if you want to show your kids Indiana Jones, but they're not old enough yet. Like,
Sure.
this is something that you could really show them, and I would recommend that, definitely.
And to fans of the original, there's a lot of like, oh, we're pulling out these references to the original, like the famous yellow car from Miyazaki's version of Lupin has the best sequence in this entire film, in a car chase sequence where you're like, that was amazing. Like all of his best friends have like very unique and super specific abilities they're the best in the world at, and that's all. Everybody gets to do their thing in that sequence.
That was the sequence that finally sold me on the movie, because until then, it was all coming at me too fast, and that happened, and I was like, okay, I now understand the tone of this movie, because like, yeah, the one guy jumps up and like cuts a car into little pieces, and one guy unscrews a sign with bullets. It's just like, all right, cool, this isn't the real world, and it doesn't need to be, and that's a wonderful thing.
So there's actually a lot of reason to get the Blu-ray of this. There's an hour and 47 minutes of bonus features that includes the original voice cast from the English voice cast has an audio reunion that come in here to talk during the commentary, which is fun from the original, dubs of the movies. There's a quick segment from the Japanese yellow carpet premiere, about a minute and 19 seconds. There's interviews of the director and Japanese characters. Japanese cast are about 30 minutes. There's a CG model gallery and just a lot more. This is a really solid set of extras for release that normally this type of release doesn't get a lot of bonus features. And I was like, wow, impressive job putting together this film for collectors. And I think both people who already love Lupin are really, really going to like this, outside of those people who are like, but wait, that's not the way it happened. Whatever, shut up. Well, and people who, this is like, if anything, I would say this is the introduction film. People are like, oh, you need to find out about this character. This is the one.
Just to double down on, if you have kids who are old enough to explore adventure movies, check this out. I have seen this 4 times so far since Chris gave it to me 2 weeks ago.
Wow. Holy shit.
4 times my son has made me watch this, and he has adored it every time.
Well, that begs the question, now that we're at the end of the show, what is our pick of the week, Aaron? Because I have several that I'd go, question mark?
Honestly, if we're talking about just quality of a film, I would have leaned towards Beast Clawing at Straws, but that's just such a bare bones disc. It has to be Love and Monsters for me. Like, that was a really quality set with good bonus features. The 4K was great, and the movie was a joy to watch. Yeah,
there's a lot of good things to pick from this week, no question. I probably would have leaned more towards Lupin myself, but I'm willing to go with Love and Monsters, because that was also like, wow, I'll watch this multiple times. Yeah. I'm really glad I own it.
Yeah.
But that is it for the 2 for Aaron with Chris Digital Noise. And I'll be back soon with John, who's working on his stack for more stuff. Aaron, anything you want to talk to people about where they want to find you online?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at Father Baldor. You can also listen to me on the Mission Impossible podcast. We're on Spreaker and Spotify and all those places with which you listen to podcasts.
Fair enough. And we'll be back soon with more Digital Noise. Thanks for listening. Click on the links on the actual One of Us page, because we get a little kickback. And that's always nice. Yay.